Have you ever struggled to fish a dry fly? Maybe you've been on the water and seen fish rising but can't get them to take your fly? Wonder what the best in the country are doing and how to fish a dry dropper to get more takes? Today we have Jason Randall back on to break down dry fly fishing, the perfect dry dropper leader setup, and how to fish it. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where we show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for this big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we love. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a kid and grew up around a fly shop. I have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in the country, and I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about any show in the world. Today, Jason is going to give us 3 of his biggest tips on rigging and fishing the dry fly. These include the unique way he rigs his leader with a tippet ring, why you should twitch your fly and when to do it, and why most people are failing on the transfer of energy in their fly, and how you can fix this when casting. Plus, we get Jason's take on the best knot to tie your leaders together, and we find out more about the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival. This is Bo's amazing event where Jason will be taking this conversation further this year. It's going to be happening in less than 2 weeks, so you can get on it right now if we still have time. I 100% guarantee this is going to blow you away today, so sharpen that pencil and get ready to take notes. Here we go. Class is in session with Jason Randall on Instagram at Jason Randall Fly Fishing. How you doing, Jason?
Hey, I'm doing good, Dave. Thanks. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on and doing another episode here. I was just looking back on it, and it's been a little while. I know you've been super busy as always with shows and things, but I think it was episode 74 where we actually talked about nymphing. So this will be a good transition, because today we're going to talk a little more about dry flies and some of the things you're doing. I think at some of the upcoming shows, we've been working with Bo and talking to some of the guests that are at his shows. And I think you're going to be at the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival. Is that correct?
You bet. I'm going to be talking fly fishing and microbrews.
And micro-dice. Good stuff.
I may not talk a lot about the microbrews, but I'll probably drink a few.
I was going to say, so one of the things you probably can't do is partake in, you're probably not drinking brews while you're presenting, right? That's kind of after the fact.
Yeah, that's for the social hour.
Yeah, the social hour, exactly. Nice. So I'm excited. I probably won't be there this year for the show, but I'm kind of building some stuff with Bo, so I'm hoping that maybe next year I'll get there. But I wanted to share, some background on what you're going to be presenting there. And I think dry flies and droppers might be one topic. You're going to be doing some other stuff. But before we jump into all that, give us a little update. 74 was back in April 2019. So it's almost been, we're going on quite a number of years. I know it's hard to say we've gone through COVID, but I guess in recent years, like the last year, what have you been up to?
Well, it's been busy, and in a good way, though. Back then, when we talked last time, I think my nymphing book had just come out, and in order to do that, I had done a long tour of some of the European-style nymphing grandmasters in Europe, and spent an awful lot of time working with local experts and worldwide experts to try to really develop all I could for that nymphing book. That's called Nymph Masters, Fly Fishing Secrets from Expert Anglers. And but since then, I really wanted to get back on my dry fly game again. So I spent the last 3 years really focusing on dry flies, developing leaders that allow the very best dead drag-free drift, but also that are also designed to be able to animate and activate the drift as well, to try to entice those trout a little bit more. So I've really focused on technique, methodology, rigging, how to rig, what to rig with. I've really focused on that. And this year at the show circuit, I've really brought that, I think, to the audience to share that with them.
Nice. And so we're talking about a little bit about Bo's events, but you also do kind of the show circuit, the other, like the fly fishing shows, right? Are you doing a number of those this year as well?
I am. We just finished up in Marlboro, then we're headed to Denver, Edison, Atlanta, and then I'll be with Bo in Dallas shortly after that.
In Dallas, yeah. And are you covering similar topics at the shows with the Furimsky shows?
Typically, yes. I'll do some private classes and then do some presentations in the seminar rooms. And it's a wide variety of different topics, yes. But usually the classes would be oriented around nymphing. I'll be doing a dry fly and dry fly dropper class at the Dallas show.
Yeah, exactly. So the dry fly, and that's what I want to dig into today, because I think nymphing is a great topic. It's something, is definitely effective. That's one of the almost controversial, right? You hear people talk about like even like Euro nymphing and some of these highly technical nymphing it's almost like people say, wow, God, you almost catch too many fish. Like what would you say to that? That seems like kind of a stretch, but do you feel like, is that a
Yeah,
valid
well,
comment?
it is legal cheating. I think Euro nymphing is so effective because when you think about it, it does really give us the best opportunity to reach those three goals of nymph fishing. In order to catch fish, you've got to reach those three intermediate goals, which is getting your flies to the strike zone, getting a really good presentation once you get the flies to the strike zone, and then having an accurate method of strike detection when that trout picks up your fly.
Right. Right. And it hits all of those. And so when you're thinking about, the dry fly, how does, maybe let's touch on, we'll start here and we'll bump around a little bit, but with the dry fly, say for your presentation, how do you maybe describe that at the show? What are a few of the key topics that you're covering there?
Well, we cover everything from start to finish, so it's designed to be something useful for maybe a more novice fisherman, but it really does get into some advanced techniques on presentation, alternatives to the dead drift. It focuses a lot on how to get that perfect dead drift when you're trying to do a dead drifting insect. So it does. It focuses on leader construction, what materials to use, where we want to attach the fly, and to what material we want to do that to give that fly the most liberty of movement to interact with the current. Especially when trout get a little bit fussy, they every little thing matters, and so catching fish on a dry fly is not just one thing. It's the sum of a lot of little things, but it can add up to a lot of extra fish in the course of the day.
Amazing. Yeah, this is awesome. I mean, all the topics you're talking about are perfect because I think dry fly fishing has always been one of my struggles. I've talked about that, but so I'm really interested in hearing that, more about this. But so let's talk about that with the dead drift because, that is a challenge. You've got all these changing currents and one current's going this way and you're trying to get this fly presented. What do you tell people when they're, how do they get the perfect dead drift?
Well, it starts with the leader. So I look at comparing commercial leaders to maybe a handmade leader, and all leaders, especially the commercial ones, are really designed to transfer energy to the fly, to turn that fly over, and to get that fly to land on the water, but. Typically, in a commercial leader, the transfer of energy fails at the taper, where that very small area, the 20% of the leader that has the taper, that's where the weakest transfer of energy occurs. And so, typically, that's where our slack begins to pile up. And so, on a 9 or 12 foot leader, you might have 4 feet of slack,
Oh,
maybe
wow.
even 5 feet of slack between you and the fly, between the butt section or the upper 60% of the leader and the fly. You might have a significant pile of slack, which isn't exactly what we're looking for. It can cause wind knots when we pick them up. And so if you're willing to make a leader, I worked a couple of years on developing a really efficient leader formula that is really 10 feet of gradually reducing in diameter, gradually reducing in length of maxima chameleon to a tippet ring. And then from the tippet ring, I'm using a very light and supple tippet. Maybe 2 feet, maybe 3 feet, depends on casting corridors and wind and how well I can manage a longer length. But what that does is that really energy efficient leader transfers all of the energy pretty effectively down to that transition when we transfer or when we change over to light supple material. So the collapse occurs there. So I actually am able to now really control where that leader collapses. And so I collapse it with only a foot or two of slack right before the fly. So it's much less tangle prone. It's just more effective in casting. And the way it transfers energy, it really gives you a much more elegant cast. And then the way it tends to collapse, it's almost like doing a pile cast. Even when you're not trying to do one, you put a lot of slack to give that fly the best liberty to move with the current.
Wow, that's awesome. And now, just to clarify, are you talking about dry flies here as well, or is this more a nymph focused leader?
No, this is all dry flies. Yeah, this would all be dry flies.
Yeah, dry fly. So the cool thing about this is you mentioned tippet rings, probably something that not a lot of people think about with dry fly fishing. So describe that. Why is a tippet ring? What do you use? Because you would think that the tippet ring might be a little bit heavy, and then why the tippet ring?
Some of the older ones probably were too heavy, but the newer ones, several manufacturers are now making 1 millimeter tippet rings, and they actually will float. They don't break the surface film, so they'll sit right up there, and I haven't had a problem with them.
Wow, amazing. Okay, so good. So you're going to be covering, at the Texas Festival. You're going to talk about, these are some topics, and another one you mentioned was kind of moving current. As maybe this applies to some of that, but describe that. If you've got all these changing currents and you see a fish rising, you see maybe a head popping out. How are you kind of negotiating the currents?
Well, I think approach angles is the first thing we should think of. I mean, we just automatically want to fire a cast right off, onto that fish. But it really pays to take a moment and just look at the angle from which you're looking at the trout and say, hey, well, this isn't the best place to cast from. If I cast from here, I'm going to have to go directly across all these currents. I'll only get about 3 feet of drift. But if I moved maybe into a downstream angled position, I could probably get 3 times that length of drift before drag took over. So I think our approach angle is often overlooked, and a lot of times too on my tricky waters that I call my home waters in Wisconsin. Sometimes you just have to do a downstream presentation. I have to get above that fish, and then that becomes a lot easier, and again often overlooked. I can just feed some slack into the drift to get that fly right down to the fish. He sees the fly first without me having the chance of lining him, casting my line over his head. There's no false cast, and boy, it can make a lot of difference.
Right. So you're talking, and I've always thought about that because that's something I've done before, and maybe not with as much success. But so, how would you do that? Would you just make your cast to where the kind of the same line, and then just kind of like have line stripped out and just let it go, let the current take it, or are there any tips there?
Yeah, for sure. I would do that as a start, what you've described. I would put a cast that will take the fly into the current lane for the trout. And then I would have sufficient slack pulled off the reel in my line hand. And then I would just simply put the rod up and down, not jiggle it side to side to feed out slack as the drift proceeded, because that moves your fly. If you go side to side, not only do you end up with all these snake coils of slack out there, but you also will move that fly if you go side to side. But if you flip it up and down to feed out slack and extend that drift, it really works so much better.
Perfect. Yeah, that is great, and I've done that before, messed up. So yeah, so up and down, and almost like you would be doing sometimes like a twitch. Is there any time where on that dry fly, as it's in some fishing, are you twitching ever that fly a little bit?
Absolutely. I'll always put a few dead drifts, drag-free drifts through, typically through that water first. And then I'll catch whatever trout there might be on a drift, natural drift. And then after that, the next ones I'll do some type of animation. And we talked a little bit about the leader and the terminal tippet, but
Mm-hmm.
I also rig my dry flies much different than I did, say, 5 or 8 years ago. I put them off. I split terminal tippet and either with a tippet ring again or a blood knot, and I'll put my dry fly off a 6-inch tag, and I'll put my dropper then down on the point, so that I've given my dry fly the ultimate freedom of movement to interact with the small scale nuances of current. But what it really does is it also gives me the maximal impact and opportunity for animation. So I can make that dry fly dance on the water. Say you've got a caddis on there, and off of a tag dropper, and then a couple feet below that, maybe 20 inches, 22 inches below that, you've got, say, a deep sparkle pupa, a weighted fly. And what I can do as that drift passes my position is I can lift and get that dry fly off of the water. And then because it's still anchored with the weighted fly, I lower it down and I can make that dance like an egg-laying caddis on the surface of the water. And man, that's deadly summer tactic. When a
Right.
trout, or maybe they're just a little soft on their bite and a little reluctant, that can make all the difference in the world. And then I also use a foam body CDC caddis that I get from Howie Fisher, actually, at Fisher Flies. And I will do the same thing with a very lightly weighted dropper. I will do kind of a twitch and pause, so that when I twitch it and pop it, that foam body will go under the water. And we used to call it a puff daddy or a puff and twitch. We used to do it with the puff daddy flies as well. But as I am twitching that back to me, I do a 3-inch pop and then a pause, and so that weighted fly pulls the CDC foam dry fly under about an inch, and then the pause allows it to pop right back up to the surface. It looks just like an emerging caddis, and it is a deadly summer tactic around my neck of the woods.
Right. And your neck of the woods is still the Driftless area?
Yep, that's home waters for me. I'm blessed to be able to fish so many different places, and I love different waters. I love seeing new waters, and I love fishing different types of rivers and streams. But boy, I'll tell you what, it's always good to come home and fish up here.
This is awesome. Yeah, I've been working on trying to put together, as we build some of our schools and courses and stuff, a dry fly school. And I'm glad we're talking about this, because Driftless is one area I haven't been to, and I'm hoping to maybe do that up there and talk dry fly. So what is the Driftless is that a really great place for dry flies for somebody to learn?
It is. It's highly technical water, though. It's all spring creeks and narrow water, so it's an exacting classroom. If you're thinking about learning to fly fish, it can be.
Yep, you could get skunked.
Yeah, it can be tough, but when you start to really work at it, you can dial it in and have tremendous success up here. And we do have so many good hatches. We have kind of maybe a 10-month blue wing olive opportunity.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes we'll get them all 12 months, but we have a lot of blue wing olives. We have a good number of caddis. We even do some crane flies. We have a good beetle, ant, and hopper season in the summer. So it is a pretty diverse dry fly fishery.
Daniel from Northern Rockies Adventures will be joining me on the podcast this year. Check it out, episode 540, where we're going to talk about what it was like growing up in the Northern Rockies and around float planes, and what it was like becoming a float plane captain. And we also find out about the family premium BC fly fishing business. Stay tuned and be sure to check out nradventures.com/wetflyswing. Angler's Coffee roasts some of the highest quality coffee on the market, and every bag you purchase goes to support the fish species we love. My favorite this month is the Woolies blend, the dark roast that Joe has worked his magic, meets my needs, and I can't explain exactly what it is, but it's smooth and just right to get my day started. You can head over to Anglers right now at wetflyswing.com/anglers to support a sustainable company with unsurpassed taste. What would be if we were putting together, a class for, again, it's always tough because there's going to be a mix, probably some, beginners and more intermediate, but when would be a good time, do you think, if it was a dry fly type of class, to do that up there?
April and May.
Okay, April, May. Yeah.
Yeah, those are really, really good dry fly. You put a purple haze on there and some kind of a pheasant-tailed variation on a dropper, and you can just have an outstanding time.
Oh, nice. Good. Okay. And I want to go back to the leader, because you mentioned some really awesome tips here, and I want to just go back and cover that again. So can you describe that dry fly leader you talked about, and then how the dropper works? Maybe just start from the butt end. And, I'm assuming you're up there using like a 4-weight or something like that, fly line?
Typically, yeah, a 3 or 4 weight is going to work well on these spring creeks. And then my upper 10 feet of the leader is what I call my standing section of the leader. And people look at it and they think, wow, that's a lot of different, material changes and blood knots. And I don't want to tie that many blood knots and whatnot. But you know what? I only tie one of those a year, typically.
Right.
And it takes me a little while to tie a blood knot sometimes, too. My eyes and my fingers aren't what they were 10 years ago. But you know how that catches up to you. But I always joke, and I don't want to offend any people out there, but it takes me about 20 minutes to tie up that standing part of my leaders, and I always put it start when I put the Bears game on because I'm usually done with my leader by the end of the first quarter, and the game's over at that point anyway.
Nice.
So I don't want to offend Bears fans because I am one, but that's just the way it's been for us.
So the Bears aren't that good these days.
Well, it's about a 20-minute game. I'll put it that way. But no, that's not. We're not that bad. But that is my standing section of my leader. Now the wear section, it gets chopped up and changed every time I change flies, or it gets buffed up and scuffed up, and so I do change the wear section of that leader probably on a daily basis. And I'll adjust it too, because since that's the point of the failure of energy transfer, on a windy day, that can blow all over the place. I can have a nice straight leader, and at that junction where I go to really light material and supple, the windy days can really can be confounding, and so I'll shorten that down to a foot. Then it doesn't make that much difference.
Oh, wow.
On other days, it might be 3 feet.
3 feet. Okay. So, and on that 10-foot section, so this is like from your fly line, you have 10 feet of what you're building with maybe describe that again. How does that look? How many knots are you putting in there? What is your breakdown?
Well, I can also send that to anybody that wants it too. And it's not.
How would they get that? How would they get that, Jason? What would be the best way if somebody wanted to get a view of this?
Yeah, probably to reach out on Instagram.
Okay. What's your Instagram, just so we know?
At Jason Randall Fly Fishing will get to me, and I usually check it here and there. I'm not on it all the time, but I would be happy to, send it along to anyone. But I'm looking it up now here so that I can give you some more specifics. So I got to pull it out of a presentation, but I do share it at the presentations and program.
Okay, and you're probably getting people that are taking phone screenshots and stuff, right?
Yeah,
All sorts
and
of
I
things.
don't care. They can take it. I mean, that's why we did it, is to be able to share it. So I'm just looking at it here. So my stream leader is 32 inches of 20-pound chameleon. That's maximum chameleon to the first blood knot. That attaches on the other side to the fly line. Okay, so 32 inches of 20-pound, and then I do 26 inches of 15-pound with a blood knot connection, then 22 inches of 10-pound Maxima chameleon, then 16 inches of 8-pound, 12 inches of 5-pound, and 12 inches of 4-pound to a tippet ring. And actually, this leader, it's not the sole efforts of my work. We kind of put our heads together when we were all out fishing one time, Devin Olson and Ed Engel and I, and we were talking leaders, and Devin had his favorite, and Ed had his, and A.K. Best, we kind of used some of his ideas on this as well. And this is kind of over the course of discussions and a couple of drinks, this is what we came up with. And so it's kind of more of a corroborative effort. I don't want to take credit for it by myself. But it makes you a good caster when you have the right leader. Plus, when I have that 10 foot of standing leader, and I add 2 feet of wear section, which is maybe 6x material terminal tippet, you talk about being able to animate that, because I can lift all of that off the water without dragging it back to me, and I can make that thing pop and dance and twitch, and that's great for hoppers too. So these long leaders, I can pick pockets and I can reach out over, and I don't have as much problem with drag because I can kind of more or less high stick a leader that long, and that's a deadly technique, and sometimes we forget that.
Amazing. Yeah, this is sweet. So basically you've got this heavier, nice built, and you're not losing the transferred energy is very much reduced versus, say, if you buy a store-bought. And then you have a tippet ring. And the main reason for the tippet ring, why is that again? Why not just have another blood knot down to your smaller tippet?
Because every time I would change out my terminal wear section, my terminal tippet, I would be shortening that last segment.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so I would be way back, into the main body of the leader. Plus, I like the way it makes just an abrupt transition between the stiffer, thicker upper section and that real soft, supple, and thinner lower section, the wear section. So that real abrupt transition is what really allows that to collapse at the point where that slack ends up right in front of my fly.
Wow. Okay, so perfect. And then on the length of the tippet ring, or on the length of the tippet, what would be the longest? I think you mentioned the shortest, but what would be, let's just say, what would be the shortest and what would be the longest length of tippet you would have on there?
I probably don't use much over 4 feet
Okay.
below the tippet ring because that would be 14-foot leader to the dry fly. Then if I've got a dropper, then I'm getting out to 16 feet ish. And when you go to pick that up, I mean, that can be maybe a little tangle prone. So typically, I would say average, I'm probably around 2 feet, 28 inches, maybe something like that.
Yeah, 28 inches. Okay, and I want to talk about the dropper again here in a sec. But the cool thing about this is that what it sounds like very similar to, we just had Pete Erickson on talking about some of the Euro nymphing stuff. And he was describing the Euro nymphing leaders. And I mean, this
Yeah.
sounds like very similar to some of those. Like there's one old school, I think Vladi, he mentioned back in the old days, he had this one was pretty much one length the leader, and then it had the tippet ring and then and the tippet.
Yeah.
Is there a lot of similarities here in the nymphing stuff you do?
Not in the way I use it now. And I trained under Vladi when I
Oh,
was
okay.
doing the
Oh, wow.
book. And so I got to fish with him. I can't pronounce the name of the river
No,
we
me neither.
fished
Yeah.
with, but it was down by Zakopane in Poland. And we spent a couple of days down there fishing with him. And he is a superstar. He is, and colorful and just a nice guy and so generous with his talents and knowledge. But the leaders that I use now are more along the lines of what I would call a micro leader
Oh,
for
yeah.
Euro nymphing. And so my leaders are super, super simple, and it's just maybe 10 to 12 feet of an upper material. Usually it's something that's visible to a tippet ring, and then anywhere from 5 to 10 feet of terminal fluorocarbon below that, so that everything that would be in the water or under the water would be level and thin. It's the mantra thin to win, because that cuts through the currents more effectively, and that allows our flies to get to depth, reach those three goals of nymphing we talked about, which is first getting your flies down through the current.
Right, getting them down. No, so that's a very good clarification. Yeah, so the dry fly leader we described is for dry flies. It makes sense, so you can
Right.
control that. And then the Euro is the micro leader, which Pete also mentioned a little bit. Then I think he just won. We've been talking about this, but he won the gold up in Canada this year using
Oh,
his
great. Wow.
yeah, using his micro leader.
Awesome.
And he described that. I'll put a link to the show notes on that episode that we had where
Yeah.
yeah, so it's been
That's
pretty
cool
cool.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very fun part of our sport, Euro nymphing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's awesome. I think it sometimes gets there. It's interesting how it works. You've probably heard this a lot. You're sometimes right. You get this new topic that comes out, and people kind of poo poo it, like, "Oh, Euro nymphing. What is this crap?" But
Right.
it's kind of funny. I mean, what's your take on that? Have you seen this over your time in fly fishing, where you see these new things come out and they work really well, but people are like, "Why? This is not fishing." Have you ever what's your take there?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's true. But I saw the same thing happen around Tenkara too.
Oh,
Is
right.
it kind of exploded into the sport for a couple years, and then it's just kind of, it's kind of a lot less discussed and a lot less common, I think, than it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago when it really came on strong. But I think Tenkara is also a great way for those people that like it to present and animate a dry fly, and also works well for a euro nymphing rig too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's all awesome. So let's finish up. We'll go back to the leader. So we got this dry fly leader, and then describe again how you do the dropper setup.
Okay, so below that tippet ring, into my terminal tippet now that I attach to that tippet ring, I might put a couple of feet of terminal tippet, and then I'll split that into two: a long tag. I'm sorry, a short tag and a long dropper. To the short tag, which might be 6 inches, I'm going to fasten my dry fly. And to the longer dropper segment, I would then put my dropper. So my dry fly is on the tag, maybe 4 to 6 inches from that knot or tippet ring, and then the dropper would be trailing below that.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. So you're using like a surgeon's knot for the tag?
You could, yeah,
Yeah.
you could. If you use a surgeon's knot, you can always put a half hitch in front of it, yeah, to get it to come off a little more parallel. Some people think
What do
that
you use for your knot?
I'll use a blood knot. I like the way it comes off, but that half hitch in front of a double surgeon's, that's an Ed Angle trick that he shares. And I thought I've done it and it works really well. It gets the flies away from each other a little more effectively. And I think it does prevent the line wrap, the tippet wrap that we sometimes see with two flies.
This is cool. Yeah, no, I love the fact that you're talking about the blood knot. That's kind of my go-to knot. I've always used the blood knot. It's kind of what my dad taught me back in the day. And so
Yeah,
you use that for everything. Is that your main knot for tying leaders together?
it is.
Yeah. And is
Yep.
that because I've heard it's the strongest knot, but why do you like the blood knot?
Well, I think again, it takes a little while to learn it. It's not the easiest knot for most of us anglers, but if you'll spend a Sunday afternoon working on it, I think you can get pretty good at it. And I get to the point where I can tie it reasonably quick. Some people do like tippet rings, and I have nothing against putting a tippet ring down that low in the wear section to split it.
Mm,
The advantage of having a tippet ring is if I do break off one fly and not the other, I don't have to completely re-rig the split.
right.
So, I mean, I do use blood knots though, but by anchoring my dry fly off of that tag, I only have my dry fly fastened by the hook eye. It's not got a trailer dropper fastened to the hook shank. And so it really does give that dry fly the ultimate in liberty to move. It's not tethered front and back that restricts its movement. And especially in some of the winter conditions like they are right now up in Wisconsin. I mean, we're having low, clear water, and all those little things matter. And again, being a good dry fly fisherman isn't just one thing. It's a sum of a lot of things that add up to a lot of extra fish at the end of the day, though. Like the casts that we need to do, and
Right.
when I teach these dry dropper and dry fly classes, I really emphasize two casts. If you can do a reach cast, and if you can do a slack line cast, like a pile cast, those are the fly casts that we need mostly as dry fly fishermen. And then good line management technique as well, mending. And I do spend quite a bit of time on mending as well, because too often we just kind of drag
Yep.
our mend instead of snapping it off the water, almost like you do with a spiral pickup. When you pick up your line, you got to snap it off the water. And if you'll do that, you can mend without moving your fly usually, or moving it minimally.
Right. God, this is great. So, and then just to finish up on the dropper there. So basically you're doing your 24 inches of your tippet, which could be like, what typically on the X what would be the smallest you'd be using?
Oh boy, I used to use smaller, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that. But now I struggle with 7X anymore. It's I can't feel it as well in my fingers, and I really have trouble seeing it. So I'm going to use 6X. If I'm in stained water, or I might go down to 5X or something like that. But typically I would be at 5 or 6.
5 or 6. Okay. So you have and then you have, say, 24 inches of that in the situation. Then you would do a blood knot, and then would the end of the blood knot, describe that again, how that blood knot works to your flies.
Okay, so we're talking about the terminal or wear section of the leader. So I'd have probably 2 feet average then from the tippet ring down to the first blood knot, or tippet ring if you want. And I would put a blood knot there with fluorocarbon. And then I would tie my dry fly on the short tag end, which would be 6 inches. And then my dropper then would be on the long end of that blood knot, which would give me about anywhere from 16 to 24 inches separation from the dry fly. And again, that's what works for me most of the time.
That's awesome. And then that's like you said, then you can, with that, use that little, and then what would be a good dropper you'd put on, if you had, let's say, describe maybe a couple of patterns you'd have as the dropper in the main.
Well, in the summertime, I probably would go with a modified X caddis as my dry fly, and a deep sparkle pupa as my dropper. It's a
Mm-hmm.
great summer pattern. Plus, I can animate that in real enticing ways to catch a few more trout every day. The rest of the time, in the early spring, late winter, I probably would be using purple haze and some small. I like the ice dub Frenchies in size maybe 18s. And again, when I'm using droppers, I'm not using real heavy flies because I like the smaller flies anyway, even for my dry flies. And a lot of the larger nymphs, the heavier nymphs, are going to sink it. And, when we're dry droppering, we're not intending to get our dropper to the strike zone of nymph fishing. So you're not going to get there because if it were to get there, then that nymph, that weighted nymph in the strike zone would be moving half speed of the surface current, which is that's how fast the strike zone moves beneath the current. It's half the speed of what we see. So you'd ask your dry fly to move at full speed. You'd be asking your heavily weighted nymph to move at half speed. You're going to get dragged somewhere in that.
Mm,
Between the two flies. So typically when I'm doing dry dropper, I'm looking for opportunities. The right opportunities for me to put on a dry dropper would be when I don't intend that dropper to get to the strike zone. So I'm looking for opportunities when trout would be feeding in the middle part of the column. So maybe not the fastest water is typically what I would choose. I would choose maybe medium and slightly slower water for my dry dropper, just to avoid that competition, between those two flies.
I see. Wow. So getting the right weight on that is perfect. And then for that dropper or for the fly that's sinking down, how do what would be a typical like weight or fly, or would you have any sort of any weight on it at all, or how would it get down?
Yeah, I would. I'd probably, if I'm doing my ice tub Frenchie below a dry dropper, I might be at a size 16 or 18 with a less than 2 millimeter bead on it, probably.
Oh, 2 mil. Okay. Good.
Yeah, something in that range, in the 2 mil range, probably.
Yeah, perfect. So this is great. So I think we covered that awesome. And again, like we said, you're going to be going over all this and more at the Texas show, and at most of the shows I think you're covering, but definitely at the Texas you're going to cover this dry dropper and go into detail, right?
Right.
Yeah, perfect. So, okay, well, you mentioned mending. I want to just touch on that a little bit because that's another kind of challenge, I think, for people. So, if you're fishing this, are you doing a lot of mending with this setup that you talk about here, or just a dry fly in general?
Yeah, I think especially on larger bodies of water or wider stretches of water, we're going to need to mend. I mean, on some small spring creeks, if you are casting more or less straight upstream or straight downstream, the mending isn't as common. But anytime you're in anything larger than that, you're going to need to mend. And the trick to mending is to mend early and often,
Mm,
and to break the surface tension. Once you let that fly line sit on the water for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, it really starts to get pretty stuck on it. It'll start to settle below the film, and so the water gets a pretty good grip on that line. And when we mend, we have got to break that surface tension. Otherwise, we make this big slurping sound and we move our fly because we cannot break the surface tension without doing those. So I try to snap my line up and kind of flip it in the air at the same time in a spiral fashion so that I'm getting the line up off the water in one snap. And then I'm also getting, by doing it in kind of a C shape or a spiral fashion, I'm also introducing the mend as well.
okay, and when I think of just a typical mend, so you could just say an upstream mend. You got your fly, maybe the current's dragging part of it down, your line down. You make a little upstream mend to get it maybe in the right. So what you're talking about, the snap and flip, would be maybe describe that more. How is that different than just say maybe like making that one action of mending your fly line upstream in a certain situation?
I think the biggest thing is probably the speed of the men. Most of the time, we just kind of lazily pick up the line and we kind of throw it up above it. But in doing that slow movement of our hand, we are actually creating those problems we're trying to avoid. And so, what I find myself doing is I do kind of a very quick snap at the same time that I send a loop down the line, and then I can kind of control where that mend occurs, so that I can mend not maybe in front of me directly, but where the current is having the most negative effect on my line, and that's where we want our mend to go. And so by kind of adjusting the degree, I can kind of put that mend where I need it. But because I do it in a quick snapping movement, almost like instead of kind of, if you envision a typical mend, it's kind of an upside down U.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just kind of this slow sweep, kind of up and then upstream and up in the air. But mine is more done with the in a spiral fashion. So, and I'm snapping it to get that. First thing I need to do is break the surface tension and the grip on the water, and then I need to have the same movement that will send that coil down the length of the line so that I get the mend where I need it. So my mends are more snappy, I guess, if I were just going to describe them in one word.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's definitely different than probably the way a lot of people think about it. So the snap and flip, so you're getting the mend, and basically you're getting the line up off of the water. So you're kind of controlling, you're controlling it. So I can imagine if you're using that 10-foot section of your butt end, which is, if that sinks down, you're in trouble, right? So you're always trying to keep that kind of like uncontrol on top of the water. Is that the goal here?
Typically, yes, it is. But if you think of what we would describe as a spiral line pickup, when we pick up to do the next cast, if we don't do something like a spiral or a twitch, we will get that loud slurping sound when we go to recast. And that's the same kind of a movement I do for the men. So I'll do that spiral snap to break the surface tension when I go to recast, so it does not. It doesn't make that sound, but my mend looks a little bit like that too. It looks almost like a spiral pickup, because once I get the air out of the line out of the water and away from its grip, then I can start to do things with it that are not going to have negative consequences.
Trout Routes is the most comprehensive mapping app for trout anglers. With over 50,000 trout streams, 350,000 access points, public land maps, and more, Trout Routes is the #1 resource for navigating, researching, and exploring trout streams, and it deserves a place in every angler's toolkit. I was in New York fishing recently. My first time in New York fishing, I had the Trout Routes app, and I was able to check out and access public access points through the maze of private property on the rivers we were fishing. And after I got into the stream and was fishing down through a run, I wasn't quite sure. I saw a house down below. I wasn't quite sure where the property lines ended, but given that I had Trout Routes, I was confident where I was fishing, and I was able to assure that I wasn't trespassing. You will be fully prepared with offline maps. You can get driving directions to points of interest, drop pins, add your notes in the app, all while keeping all of your data private to your account only. You can visit troutroutes.com right now to learn more and download the Trout Routes app for free in the App Store today. That's Trout Routes, TROUTROUTES. Start exploring today. And when you do this kind of the snap and flip, are you typically doing this and not pulling your line or your flies out of the zone? Can you do this while you're kind of fishing them while they're in the zone, or do you do this all before you get to the fish?
Well, in a perfect world, I can. But it's not always perfect.
No.
And, I try to get that mend exactly where I want it in the line. I try not to move the flies, but, sometimes it works out better than others. Sometimes it works out just the way you envision it, and sometimes you end up wrecking your drift.
Gotcha. Cool. So you're talking about the as you talk about the snap and flip or the spiral, it reminds me of like in a spay cast, the snake roll. And I'm not a great snake roll, but is that kind of the same sort of thing?
Yep. That is very similar.
Yeah, the snake roll. Okay. And so the idea being there, just like a spay cast, you're trying to get that line stick off the water. And whenever you hear that slurping sound, I can picture Simon Gosworth when he talked about the slurping sound of, in his videos. But that's what you want to avoid, right? You don't want to get. How do you avoid that slurping? Is that why you do this, to avoid the slurping?
For the recast, you bet. You can either do a spiral, or you can just twitch your rod up and down so that the twitch goes the length of the line. And then once the line has broken free from the surface tension, then you can cast it without making any sound. And the cool thing about that is, with either that technique or the spiral pickup or snake roll modification, is not only is it not slurp, but it doesn't disturb the surface like it does if you don't. If I pick it up without doing that, I could really send all kinds of surface ripples and disturbance through the water. And if it's on a slow moving pool, that's enough to put the pool off sometimes. And if I do some type of a spiral or modified pickup, it just doesn't disturb the water as much. Not only does it not make much sound, that slurping sound, but it's really, really effective in not disturbing the water.
Perfect. All right. This is great because we're talking dry droppers and then also just kind of how to fish it. So as your flies are going down, it sounds like if you see a fish, maybe you're going to try to put some dead drifts on it. After that, when do you start twitching, and then what is like movement of the fly? What does that look like?
Well, I think a lot of times I'll come through there with a dry fly, and so many people have advocated, it's not my original idea, but advocating tearing down through the water level. So starting out right on the surface, then bring a dry dropper through it, and then maybe nymph it, and then maybe, twitch a woolly bugger through it at the end or something. So they're tearing down, and I got a chance to fish with an excellent dry fly fisherman, Jeff Currier, because now he lives just north of me here in Wisconsin. And so we've fished together several times now, and just watching what he does with a dry fly is pretty incredible. Very talented and gifted angler, but he does a lot of times take it through with a dry fly and then comes back through with dry dropper. And then, towards the end, he will start doing some animations after the if the dead drifts have either produced all the fish they're going to, or there haven't been any takes on it. He'll start some animations. And so a lot of it is a high rod position. So we're not putting that line on the water, and we're trying to keep as much of the leader off the water too. So typically, when we're recovering slack on a classic upstream presentation, we've got a low rod position. We're bringing the slack back in with our offhand, our non-rod hand, or our line hand, and then recovering that slack that way through the drift. Well, for these animated drifts, rod position is really high. All the line ideally is off the water, and we've got this long leader, and he uses a long leader too. I think his was 12 or 13. And then we are just vibrating and shaking that rod a little bit, giving a little pop up, side to side shakes. But it's all pretty subtle. I mean, we're not trying to move that 6 inches at a time. We just want to try to make it move in a natural looking way that a normal insect might. Again, bearing in mind that trout do eat living things. And so these things move, and that will really add, that degree. Sometimes it's what seals the deal on a trout is that little bit of lifelike animation, but it is a very high rod position. You're up at about 45 degrees or so, much different from our classic, the drag free drift.
Right. So you're high rod. So you're trying to keep it at on this. Are you literally trying to keep all of the leader? Can you keep that out of the water up into the fly? Is that how it looks, or do you have a little bit of tippet on the water, or what's the goal?
Sometimes, I mean, if you look at the classic Tenkara animations, they try not to let anything ever hit the water, and so they're trying to just get the fly to come down on the water. And I think we can try that as well. We can do it just as effectively, I think, as well with these longer, lighter leaders. But if 6 inches or a foot of that leader, that terminal tippet, lays on the water, I don't think it's not a negative. But what we really want to do is keep the bulk of it off of the water. And if you can keep it all off of it, that's fine. Especially when you do the dancing egg-laying caddis, there isn't anything on the water for that animation.
Oh, right, the dancing egg laying. So that would be what would be the good pattern to match that dancing egg? So this would be a different size. Caddis laying its eggs and it's bouncing up and down, boom, right? Like boom, boom, boom.
Right. And so, I mean, if I were fishing the White River in Arkansas, I probably would get maybe a dry fly that looks like their brachycentrus down there that oftentimes has that bright green egg sac on it. And so I might put something like that as my dangling dry fly. Again, it's dangling off of that 6-inch tag. And so it is so lifelike that it's amazing what that will do for your fish tally. But that's probably what I would do if there is that type of species there. Typically, I just use a deer hair modified X caddis from Craig Matthews, and I usually will, make that kind of dab the water surface as I lower the rod, bearing in mind that that dropper is always kind of tethered to the water itself, and so you kind of have that almost like like a it's not an anchor fly because that's a confusing term, but at least it's anchored to the water. So as you drop your dry fly, it makes that thing imparts a really really nice lifelike action to the dry fly.
Perfect. And you mentioned Craig Matthews, I think, on the flies or
Right.
yeah.
I like his fly.
Oh, cool. Yeah, his fly. That's and I just want to highlight, we had an episode recently with Craig. This is not too long ago, episode 536. We had Craig Matthews and Yvonne Chenard on the podcast. And
that would be a hoot. I'd like to see that one. Those are two really good guys. I've never met Craig, but I like his flies.
Yeah. It was great. He's got a great story because of, obviously what he built, and then also just the crazy, area he lived in back in the time. But, Yvonne also, we talk conservation. 1% for the planet is what they started.
Man. Yeah, well, Yvonne's cool too. I did some work with him when we did the book Nymph Masters, because he's a real successful nymph fisherman with tenkara, and so I fished with him a little bit up by his home waters in Jackson Hole. I learned a ton. I mean, he's a really really classy guy and a very talented fisherman.
That's amazing. Yeah, so you were able to fish with Yvonne.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. That must have been pretty awesome to, was it a little bit, what was it like fishing with Yvonne? Because I just talked to him. I feel like he's very unique. He's very, he's pessimistic, but he's optimistic, right? About stuff.
He's authentic. If I had to just use one word to describe him, he lives his philosophy. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, you think of somebody like that, pulling up in a Mercedes or something like that.
But, yeah, billionaire, the guy that built $1 billion business, right?
I know. It couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, he pulls up, and I don't know if it was 15-year-old Subaru or something like that, and it was loaded up with recycling magazines,
amazing
newspapers in the back, and he walks out, and I think he was wearing cut off jeans and water Crocs, and it's not what I thought. It kind of blew me away.
That's so cool. Yeah, he lives it. There's no faking any of his stuff.
No, he's the real deal there. And just as a person and as an angler and as a conservation advocate.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think it's perfect talking about Yvonne, because the tenkara, we mentioned this at the start, but the tenkara is something he definitely has pushed. But, it's one of those things out there that over time has gotten, from some people, right, there's this like, tenkara, is it fly fishing? What's your take, just to clarify that on the tenkara? Why do you think that's out there? Why do you think you get occasionally folks in the fly fishing space? And it's probably a very small percentage. But why do you think that is, that people can sometimes say, well, it's not fly fishing, why should you do that?
Well, I mean, I think you could say, you could put your own personal bias on almost anything. And I think that it's a very effective technique for those people that do it and do it, to that extent. But it's like Euro nymphing. Some people say the same thing about Euro nymphing, but it's like, what, if it's what you like to do and you practice and you become adept at it, and you're catching fish at it. I mean, what does that matter?
Yeah.
What the rest, what anybody else might think.
Perfect. That's well said. I think that's it. Yep. Do your thing and just enjoy it. And if you're having fun, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I mean, within reason. I mean, you can't just go do your thing at everyone else's expense.
Right, but, that's a good point.
I mean, as long as you're treating the fish with respect and you're enjoying the sport and you're buying a license, you're putting money back into conservation, and it's just all part of the same. We live off the same resource.
Right, and I think it kind of goes to even the conventional fishing. Like, I mean, I think the old thing of like fly fishing had this. This thought that like it was this old, uppity white guy sport on, you got to be a dry fly purist. But I feel
hopefully we've changed that.
Yeah, I feel like we've changed that, right? I think that even the conventional, because like somebody might fish conventional and love it. And there's nothing wrong with doing that or doing whatever.
And there's a lot of dry fly purists that's the way they like to fish, and that's fly fishing for them, and that's great. I think more more power to you. Whatever it is that you enjoy, I think adds to the sport. And I'll admit, I've got a buddy that's got a nice, really nice sized bass pond, and we go out with kayaks and we take spinning gear and fish wacky worms and catch a lot of big bass, and that's kind of fun too.
Mm-hmm. That sounds great. Nice. Well, let's start to take it out of here. This is going to be kind of our takeaway section, our 3 tips takeaway section, and this one is presented, like we mentioned at the start, the fly fishing and the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival. Bo is doing this great thing. He's got these events going. I think the Texas one. Have you been doing this one for a while?
I've done it a couple of times now. I haven't been able to get down there recently. I've done the Virginia one as well. These are great venues. They're really attract a lot of young families, and it's a nice mix of combining beer or wine and fly fishing, because we usually do both in our sport.
Yep.
So that's kind of cool, and it's just a really good event, and he puts on a nice program. He really stresses education in our sport and focuses on women and young people. And I love working in that type of an atmosphere, because everybody's happy to be there.
Yeah. I love that. No, this is perfect. And I think, so for you, I always love this question because I know what my favorite brew is, and I'm excited eventually to get down to the show to test it. But what's your drink? If you're out there having a beverage in the evening, what would it be?
Well, if I'm going to be completely honest, my beverage of choice is a Moscow Mule.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, pretty much everybody on the fly fishing show circuit knows that by now too. So I've made quite a few for different people in the show world. So, but that's my favorite. I do like a nice glass of beer too. I'm usually going to be like on a Pilsner or a light wheat ale or something like that. But yeah, it's good to have at the end of the day, and sometimes people come to shows and some of the best stuff gets swapped around the bar after the show's over too.
That's right. So people that go to the shows, so when you do the show, Sam, I mean, for you, is it, you do quite a bit. What is that? Do you kind of just love, do you ever get tired of the show stuff? Is it something you kind of enjoy, just going all out?
I do. It's a lot of preparation, though, because I usually will retool pretty much every program, seminar, and class from year to year. So November, December gets to be pretty intense as I'm trying to put together new material, add things I've learned in the past year, because we're all learning. Everybody's a learner in our sport. I always say that if you're not learning in our sport, then you are at that point the very best angler you'll ever be.
Right.
And so we're all learning. And so I add material every year. And I'm always excited to get out there and share that. And I always look at it as an opportunity, because I learn a lot too. People come up and say, "Hey, have you tried this?" Or I'm doing something different, and so it's a two-way street. Education is an ongoing thing. So I love to be with the people and talk about fly fishing, and usually on a 3-day show we go out, especially this time of year. You go out pretty much every Thursday and you come back every Monday. So I'm not as much. I miss Joe, my wife, and my kids and grandkids. Miss my dog Walker. And I'm like texting Joe, and I say, "Hi, honey, how are you? Send me a picture of the dog."
Right. Yeah.
You miss your dog. You have a dog?
But we had a dog for a couple of years, and it kind of passed away. But we have a cat now. It's so funny because we have this cat, which was kind of a, we kind of got it from a home, and it had it's missing 3 teeth, but we've taken care of it. And now it's ours. And when I left, it literally was sitting on my leather couch on the place I sit, like my spot. And he was like sitting there saying, basically, "Yep, see you later. I'll have your chair while you're gone." Yeah. So.
Yep, I got this.
Yeah, but no, I think we're more cat, so we're cat people now. But I love the dogs.
Oh, that's
too.
cool, though. It doesn't matter. Cats can be just as personable as well. But it is. You spend a lot of time on the road. January, February, and March. If I took every commitment, I could be gone, 5 days out of every 7 for 3 straight months, and you just can't do that, because my grandkids are young too. They're all under 5, and I like hanging with them, and going to church on Sunday and going out to lunch and dinner and stuff. So Yeah, it's good, but I love being around the people. And when it's a real busy show, there's so much energy and excitement, and it's addictive.
Yeah, that's it. So you love that's the thing, the talking, right? So do you ever at the end of those shows when you're done, say with the Texas show or any of these shows, do you feel at the end, are you totally spent, burnt, or do you have still energy at the end of the day?
Yeah, usually you're pretty well talked out because if you do,
Yeah, you're talking. I mean, you're talking more than anybody pretty much, right?
yeah, too much sometimes. And then you're doing a 2 or 3 hour class, and then you're
Right.
talking to people, on the show floor and stuff like that. I mean, it seems like, I you lose your voice sometimes at the end of the day, but it's you go to bed tired, I'll put it that way, but you wake up ready to do it again. It's like, oh yeah.
Yep. Go for it. No, this is good. Okay, so that's kind of a little bit on the background there, and like we said, we'll have a link to the Texas Fly Fishing and Brew Festival, and we'll put a link also to Virginia. We've been talking about that a little bit with some folks, but so we kind of covered that. I mean, when you're there, I guess now describe that. So what town is this the Texas show in? What's the nearest? What's the town?
The nearest big city is going to be Dallas Fort Worth, but it's in Mesquite, which is a smaller, and it's not too far away from the airport, so it's pretty easy to get to. People, oftentimes we find people that come in and spend the whole weekend, get a hotel, and those are the people that hang around the bar with us at night. And a lot of times people will make a family event around the shows, which is really, really cool as well.
That's cool. So if somebody comes to show, if somebody is just a random person, they're near, maybe driving to the area, they get there. Would they, after the show, are you saying people you're meeting up with, connecting with people that are just kind of people that are attending the event sort of thing later?
A lot of times. Yeah, we will end up going to a restaurant we can walk to. So it's either the hotel we're staying in or it's going to be someplace real close by. And we always, kind of gather and have a cocktail at at that bar or hotel or something like that. And, usually people come up and we'll talk and it's just fun. We're very welcoming and inviting typically of people that are there as well for the show, whether they're working the show or just coming with themselves or buddies or family.
Perfect. No, this is awesome. Well, and let's take it away here. So I mentioned kind of we're setting this up. So we talked, you nailed this as far as tips on the dry dropper and everything. But if you had to kind of say the three takeaways on this topic, dry dropper, fishing it and, setting it up, what would be, maybe you want to summarize or just tell us what would be the three takeaways you would tell somebody to take away on this episode?
Yeah, for dry droppers, I would say practice. I think whether you can get to the river or not, you can still practice these casts, build your leaders, take the time to do that. You don't have to be a Bears fan to do that. I'm sure there's other opportunities as well. But go out in the backyard and cast. And I think practice is probably one of the most overlooked thing about all forms of fishing is that we see the elite basketball player make that game-winning free throw when the game's on the line with no time on the clock, and we think, okay, well, that's just a God-given talent, and certainly some of it is. But you can practice, and what the average person doesn't see is they didn't see the 10,000 free throws he shot this week.
Right.
In practice when no one's watching. And so I think practicing your reach cast, practicing your mending, practicing your slack line or pile cast at home, I think is going to prepare you for the river. And then when I go to the river, one of the biggest takeaways I could share that's helped me is and it might sound a little counterintuitive, but I don't go to the river to catch fish. I go to the river to practice. I go to the river to become a better angler. And so I focus on my cast, I focus on my drift, I focus on my presentation, my line management, all these things that I'm really focusing on. And then as a result, you end up catching a lot of fish, which is gratifying and really, I guess, kind of the true reason we're going. But if you have the mindset that I'm going to practice and I want to focus on doing it right. I don't want to catch that accidental fish unless it's really big. I want to catch intentional fish. And so I think having that mindset when you do go to the river after you've practiced, take that mindset to the river and then do your homework, be prepared, know what's going to be happening on that stream or river, or if it's your own home waters, you probably already have a good feel for it so that you have the right flies, you've got everything set before you get to the river. So much of this can happen before you even get to the river.
Wow. I love that. That's the perfect, I think, takeaway is that, like you said, it's being on the river and literally not just focusing on a specific piece, the cast, the mend, that's great advice.
Yeah, that's true. And I think if you look at the industry averages, someone shared this with me that they said that, for the average angler, they spend less than 6 days a year on the water.
Right.
And I think nothing really replaces time on the water. And I think even if you just get to the pond down the street from you, the golf course pond or something like that.
Yeah. Or the blue line, or just looking at a blue line in your backyard somewhere nearby,
Yeah.
right?
Anything. You don't have to get to your favorite trout stream if it's 2 hours away, but you can get someplace or pick up the fly rod and practice that I think you could get to that. They say, that 90% of the trout are caught by 10% of the anglers. You can get to that 10% if you really commit yourself to it.
Perfect. And one last one, random one here. So you mentioned the Bears a couple times, and I always think whenever I think of the Chicago Bears, I think of the '80s, right? Rich Ray Perry, Jim McMahon with his chewing and everything. So why you're up in Wisconsin? So what you haven't? Did you grow up in Chicago, or why are you? Or are you just close enough there that you're a Bears or a Green Bay fan?
Well, I like them both, and I'm not just a diehard fan. I like to see the local teams do well,
Okay.
and I'm a frustrated Bears fan. I love to see the Bears do well. I like to see Green Bay do well as well because I'm up there a lot. But I grew up in Southern Illinois,
Oh, okay.
and so I went to school in Central Illinois, and I think. Just having that allegiance probably skews it just a little bit, but I just like to see a good game.
A good game. So what happens when it's Chicago against the Green Bay? Who are you going for?
Yeah, I've got to take the Staining on that one because they're both. I have friends that are diehard loyalists in both camps, and so I would probably run the risk of offending one of them.
And then what about this one? If you had to choose between the rest of your life, you could only nymph fish or only dry fly fish.
Okay, nymph fish.
There you go, nymph. And that's mainly because, you could, you enjoy it more or you could just catch more fish?
I enjoy both. I really do enjoy. The one thing I probably don't do as much as I should is streamer fishing. I just have not. I've done it a lot, but I've not developed what I would call any specific expertise at it. And I'd like to probably focus more on that. But nymph fishing is going to catches fish for me anyway more consistently than anything else. I know that if there's no hatch, I can still catch fish. 90% of the time, trout are feeding from the subsurface drift, not on the surface. And I just know that I'll have more fish at the end of the day for me. Typically. And I know a lot of really good dry fly anglers that probably could do very, very well on most days too. But in my hands, I know I can do better nymph fishing day after day.
Perfect. And you, and just give us a heads up as we head out the books. So you've written a number of books. What would be anything to take this conversation further? Just to let us know what you have going. Do you have any new books coming up as we're looking ahead?
No, I've taken a sabbatical at this point. I used to be writing for 2 or 3 magazines every year. I'd be putting out a lot of magazine articles and several books. I've written 4 books, the first 3 being the Fly Fisher's Guide trilogy to different aspects of our sport. And then the most recent one is Nymph Masters, which was a cool thing because it was a corroborative effort from several of us. And I got to learn and fish with people like Joe Humphreys several times and Lefty and Landon Mayer, George Daniel, Ed Engel, just a ton of great nymph anglers. And it was fun. I learned a lot, and it was a great book because of all the secrets that everybody shared. But I'm on sabbatical for writing. I'm doing a lot more on stream education, and if people are interested in that, they can certainly hit my Instagram handle as well. I do a lot of work. I'll be in Colorado doing a school, 4 or 5 day school. I'm usually out there every summer for that, and then I'm doing some work up in the Wisconsin driftless streams. So I really enjoy. I like the personal one-on-one on-stream stuff. I think it's a real effective educational format.
Perfect. All right, Jason. Well, I think this is great. I think we will leave it there for today, and we'll send everybody out to on Instagram at Jason Randall Fly Fishing. And I just want to thank you for your time today and all the tips this episode has been. You pretty much knocked it out of the park, I think, for people. So I'm sure you'll get a few connections as we go. But thanks again for everything today.
Great, Dave. Thanks. It's great to be back on with you again. Thank you for the opportunity.
That is a wrap. You can grab all of the show notes at wetflyswing.com. And please follow us on Instagram and share this episode out with someone you love. Please send me an email, dave@wetflyswing.com, if you have any feedback or want us to put together an episode on this podcast for you. Check in anytime. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and would love to meet up with you on the water. We have new fly fishing schools going all year long and all around the country, so if you want to connect, let's do it right now. All right, time to get out of here. I hope you have a great evening. I hope you have a great morning or great afternoon wherever in the world you are. And I appreciate you for stopping by and checking out the show today. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.